Welcome back, everyone, to The Fertile Dark. And this is a really special episode. I'm excited because we have we have a lot of changes. One is that we're moving from just audio to also audio and video. And the other is that we have a co-host that will be joining us. And that's a good friend, Krista.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I'm excited to explore the depths with you, Daniel, and excited to feel into more of the human experience and discuss it with you and the audience. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here.
So I haven't really talked before about a lot of the beginnings of the podcast, but for those who don't know, like, you really have been a huge part of bringing this whole process together, the whole journey together. And so I'm really excited. I feel like there's a lot of alignment and vision and desire, and there'll be lots of time for us to explore that. And also for this week, I think it's a really appropriate thing that we want to explore, which is finding our place in the world, like really connecting to that deepest place within, soul, identity, and purpose in the world, and really embodying it. So I wonder, like what are some things that are already coming up for you around that idea, like soul, purpose in the world, just as you've been thinking about it?
Well, I was excited to talk about this as a topic because I have been personally challenged with this exact topic. I had this idea going into grad school of the exact direction I wanted to go. I had this huge vision and come to these points in my journey where I questioned, is this the right direction? And so I thought the soul's direction, the soul's journey is a great topic to explore as I'm going through this. So I'm just personally connected to this in this moment in my life.
I'm curious about that because this is something that you and I have talked about a little bit. Like, I'm curious about some of those challenges that you've been wrestling with.
Yeah, some of the challenges have been just as I find out more information, people who are in different fields that are related to what I want to do, these experts have certain information that are making me question, okay, am I going the right way, or am I going about this the right way? I feel like I'm going in the right direction, but maybe my approach needs some revising. And by that, one of the main things that's come up is that instead of focusing on this huge vision in the future and being deterred by all of these pieces of information, I can kind of focus more on the present moment and how the next step will unfold. So looking more short term and trying to think of what I want my life to mean and how I want it to feel in this moment in relation to that vision.
A lot of my time is spent with kids in high school. So this is a really common conversation topic for me with kids, where they're saying, like, they're trying to decide what career field do they want to go into, what school do they want to go to, what major do they want to choose, do they want to go tech school route, do they want to go to the university route. So it's really interesting to be thinking about it in that frame as well, and how common this feeling is, even for myself. I think for me, it was very much like the first time I ran into it was when I finished my active duty military contract. My vision had been, I'll just do this for 20 years, and then I'll retire, and then I'll just live life then. And 4 years later, I was done. And it was like a real existential kind of issue. But I really, and I've run into that a few times, but I find like the wrestle of the present moment versus vision of the future, and like, what is the path between here and there? How do you really find it?
Yeah, I think there's at least in the US, this cultural idea of my meaning and purpose must be associated with this one job for the rest of my life. And that can happen. And that's not a bad goal to set for yourself if you can see that might work. But I feel like meaning can come from other places as well. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to know right away, this is my job, this is my identity, this is how I belong in the world, and also put this pressure on ourselves to think that that's the only one job we'll have that has purpose. Our culture doesn't really give this idea of flow, of progression. It's like you have to know what it is, and you have to have that really strong vision, or you're not connected with your purpose. You're not in your power. Whereas it seems like it's really a process of unfolding.
It almost feels like a little industrial, like what cog are you in the machine? And it always just feels a little flat to me, like a little shallow, like, what does that even mean? You know, like, I mean, even if I were to say like, oh, I want to be a doctor. I remember I had a doctor face, and it was very short lived, but it was like, why? Like, what is the function of that particular externalization of who I am? And there's a real disconnect. Like I was just thinking about, like, recently, a lot of studying around the idea of a midlife crisis. There's so much of this existential purposelessness of why am I doing what I'm doing, in kind of when you hit that mid 30s to 50 kind of zone. But on the front end, I see so much stress around feeling the need to figure that out when kids are like 15, rather than figuring out who they really are and then allowing the expression of that through something else, like through medicine is an expression of self rather than medicine defining self. So an internal locus versus an external locus.
Yeah, the idea of, the job is what will make us feel like we belong. That does fall flat. It doesn't really give us that sense of belonging just to take that job. It does have to come from a sense of, I know myself. I know what my strengths are. I know how I want to serve the world. And it comes from that place of knowing from within. And that, I think, is not taught in high schools. How to know yourself. Where's that class? But there is that pressure of, you better figure out what you're gonna do for the rest of your life.
It makes me think of like the idea of persona versus ego versus self. Persona is the mask we wear, essentially to be socially accepted. Ego is the conscious perception of self. And then self, capital S, is like the deepest, truest version of who we are. And I feel like so much of adolescence is focused on the persona and developing ego, like developing a conscious like understanding of who we are. One of the things that I love that Bill Plotkin talks about is that a marker of true adulthood, like a developmental task to move from adolescence into true adulthood, is the discovery of like the capital S self, like really being initiated into that space where, like, essentially instead of going from top down, we're shifting that and going bottom up, and we're saying like, okay, how can, instead of school being a way of training me in my social identity, we're saying, how can we now shift that and saying like, how can my conscious construct of self be a vehicle for something that is deeper? I'm curious, like, what are some things, because this idea you're talking about, like identifying strengths, I feel like that's really hard for a lot of people in a healthy way. I feel like some people are really good at doing this in an unhealthy way, but I'm curious, what are some things that you found that are helpful for you in identifying and accepting those strengths that you have naturally?
It seems like it's not necessarily easy, and it is kind of a long process, or it can be. Like you said, human nature kind of lose your sense of self when you're young, in an attempt to belong with the community. You kind of drop away aspects of yourself. And so it does become a process, a long part of the journey to gain that self back. So it doesn't seem like here's the one thing I did to get back to myself, to know my strengths. It was a long process of getting back to my intuition, and that can be done through many aspects: awareness practices, getting more into my body, asking others what they see as my strengths, talking to my community, and getting an idea externally as well. Sometimes that objective opinion is really helpful. So there are kind of quite a few things, and I think it's also a process of experimentation. You find yourself through trial and error. You try something out and find out what does and doesn't align with what feels good to you, and then you move forward from there, and you just keep doing that.
Yeah, there are a couple of things you said that I think were really potent there. Like one was, how do you say it? Like, was it getting in touch with your intuition, or like learning to trust your intuition? I can't remember exactly how you said it. There's that connection with intuition that feels really significant for a variety of reasons, but then also like the connection with the body. I feel like those are two things that I'm really curious about from your experience, how you've gone about that.
It really does feel to me like the body is a key doorway to intuition. I have done yoga and meditation practices, and I'm not advanced by any means in either of those practices, but I notice that when I practice them more regularly, it becomes a lot more easy. It becomes easier to tap into yourself. It doesn't feel like this cognitive struggle of, who am I? What do I want? I have no idea. This is confusing. And you sink into somewhere lower in your body. And it's like from your guts, you just know, like, this is what I want. This is what I don't want. And it just flows from you so much more easily. It's fluid.
It makes me wonder if that's some of the pull for me for doing yoga. Because I remember the first time doing yoga, I was like in high school. I was like, what is this magical thing we're doing? We're like taking our shoes off and stretching in weird ways. And I love it. And I was like, I don't know, 15, 16. I was like, this is amazing. Why don't we do this all the time? I don't know that I could have told you this is why I love it. Because honestly, at the time, it was like, we're just stretching in weird ways. But I really loved it. And I wonder if that's some of it, like that connecting to the body in a different way, like the breath, the body, like feeling that real connection throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you necessarily need to be deeply aware of why it works, but just doing it, just practicing does help. And I think for me, the longer I practiced regularly, which I've, stepped back from it right now in life, but there was a period when I was doing it very regularly, and it brought this sense of awareness of my body after a certain amount of time, where I went from, oh, these are just weird stretches that are really cool, to, wow, I feel that my hips are very tight right now. That brings me awareness. I'm sitting too much. That brings the awareness of, okay, I need to get out and about. So those things kind of, like, the more you practice, the more it just becomes easier for you to connect quickly what you need in life. And it's not just a matter of in your body, but what you need in your soul, for your soul.
I am also just aware that we talk about that. We're talking about this term soul, and I feel like there's a lot of ways that people talk about it. I wonder maybe if we get some clarity on what do we really mean when we're saying this, because I feel like there are a lot of ways that people can interpret that. And it might be helpful if we just kind of said, this is where we're coming from when we say this. When we say soul, when we say self or purpose or whatever. I'm like, do you have a framework that you're working from in that regard?
I admit that it's just kind of a collective idea of many conversations about soul. I don't necessarily have a specific definition to give right offhand, but something that does come to mind is the idea of soul being your life energy or your essence. Yeah, like the drive from within.
Yeah, that's really similar to how I think about it as well. For me, my introduction into the idea of soul and purpose has come through like Bill Plotkin's work. And so for me, that's really where I like find my roots. I love like the idea of life essence is really connected. Like he talks about soul as our ultimate place, specifically he talks about soul as an ecological concept where like you were talking about like the real cognitive bias that we have socially and in the education system. And so rather than this kind of left brain cognitive first, egocentric view, soul being ecological in that it is both my ultimate place where I sit within the larger whole. And so he talks about, like in his book Soulcraft, he talks about this really beautiful experience. He like went up into the mountains of Colorado and he did this vision fast where through this vision fast, he connects with this deep essence of identity being a weaver of cocoons, like in a metaphorical kind of mytho-poetic way. And so he has like, there's this identity, cocoon weaver, but that's like, he talks about how like, that's not really the whole idea. It's like the one who weaves cocoons, like sitting at Love Lake. And so like, there's this place both in a community and within the world. And also like the pull of how you want to be present, like how you feel like the need to be present in the world. And so you have the ultimate place of the deepest part of yourself in a ecological way where who I am is deeply connected to who you are and also the natural world itself, like the more than human world.
Absolutely. I think that it's something that is very important to point out. When we talk about the soul's journey, soul is the home, but it's in relation with self and others and the external world. And I think in the US, with a culture that is so focused on the individual's journey, growth, etc., we could really use that reminder of soul being like a location within a greater context.
I completely agree. It feels like it really is everywhere, but that we've almost lost the ability to see it. As I look back at my own journey, it's been devastating. The feeling of lostness. I remember when I first started my undergraduate studies. I had just done 4 years full-time in the military. I'd spent half of it in the Middle East and felt like the most like reasonable, mature thing to do would be to go into a Middle East Studies and Arabic program in university. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done because of how much dissonance I felt internally all the time. Like I loved the language learning piece, but the whole overall experience, it felt like the equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. I can't even describe it well enough, like how dissonant it felt. And when I finally acknowledged that and allowed that to come to the surface, I felt like I fell off a cliff. Like I was so lost. I dropped out of school. I re-enlisted in the military, there's so many problems that set in motion. And it took me a couple years to come to a place of saying, I'm like the school I'm at doesn't feel right. The program I'm in doesn't feel right. I moved cities, I moved schools, I moved programs. And then it was like I found a program where I was outside all the time, like in the natural world all the time. And I was like, oh, this feels better. There's a rightness to it, but it's not it. Like there's something missing here, but I'm at least closer. But that was after 5 years, and it was painful. There was like depression. There was it caused a lot of dissonance in my home life, in my relationships with others. And I'm still unpacking all of that years later. And I just think, how much different would it have been? I would have started from a different place and saying, what are the indicators of something deeper, rather than saying, what's the most logical course of action?
So I'm curious, do you feel that it was more about a matter of knowing yourself and what you wanted, or more about choosing what was aligned with who you are, or both?
I think both. Yeah, I think both. I mean, for me, there's a lot of baggage that I was already bringing into it, where for me, the military was very much an escape from a place growing up that there just wasn't any space for me to feel like a person. Like, really, there were moments of it. And so there was a real need for me to even just feel connected to myself at all and explore, like, who am I really? But then also have the safety and the freedom to say, what do I want? Not even just like in my mind, or like even some of the feelings around it, but like deep down, like you said, like in your guts, like that from somewhere intangible, like what is like trying to force its way out of me. It's undeniable. Like if I go too far astray, like it almost feels like it just like sabotages, gets in the way, and it's like, no, you're going the wrong way and you need to fix that problem.
Yeah. So what do you think helped you in that time to realize I'm going the wrong way? What did you come across in life that kind of transitioned for you and allowed you to see this is not where I want to be?
For me, it was like a really horrible experience. Like I ran like straight into like a bad place. I'm trying to think how I want to describe this. Basically, it was like everything that I thought I wanted disintegrated around me. The job that I wanted, the academic pursuits that I was working on, everything about it fell apart in like a horrible way, where I got to a place of saying, I can no longer work in this place. I can no longer go to this school, and I can no longer live in this city. Complete and total, like falling apart. And it like took me a long time to really come to terms with. But what ended up happening was it was so horrible that I had to look in the mirror. I feel like I'm a really slow learner. I feel like, you know, whatever way you want to look at it, the universe is going to give you some indicators along the way. And some people are just really in tune. Like, oh, I like the breeze touched me in this way and I just knew how to do this thing. And it's like, for me, it's like I have to have like a piano fall on me, or like at the very least, someone has to throw a brick in my face. Like that's kind of where I'm at a lot of times. And this was like, I'm closing my eyes, and so like the house is going to burn down around me, so there's nowhere else to go. Just have to move on. The house is burned down. And that was what it felt like for me. It was very much like, oh, there's nothing here for me. And then I had to really think and say, well, so the next step for me was I said, what's the one thing that I've always loved doing? What's like a thread of passionate expression in my life that has always been there? And it was like, well, the one thing that I remember doing as a kid that I loved doing was being outside. So is there a way that I can go to school for that? And that's what I found. And so I picked a program where it was a requirement for me to be outside. And I picked a school that sat on like right at the base of the mountains. And I picked an apartment that was right at the mouth of a canyon. And everything that I did was outside all the time. Okay. But it really took burning the house down to get there.
Yeah, I think that reflects the idea that suffering really is a part of the process of becoming yourself. And sometimes those really challenging aspects of life or experiences in life are what teach us the most about who we are. That feeling of discomfort is really what makes it clear. Sometimes the breeze can be clear, but but the suffering really is like, wow, I don't like this, which makes you go into the question of, what do I like? What do I feel called toward, rather than what am I repelling or repelled against?
Yeah, I'm curious about the kinds of things that you find helpful in that part of the journey of the like, what do I feel called towards?
Really, one of the biggest challenges is making time for yourself to self-reflect. For me anyway, I get very caught up in, oh, I don't have time for that. So just actually sitting down and taking the time, reflect on yourself. And again, that getting back with your intuition, your body, make you feel connected to that which is outside of yourself, at least for me, helps me to answer those questions of what do I want? the idea of being in nature, being creative, connecting with others, serving others, those feelings of connecting with the external world help me to pinpoint how I want to fit into all of that and what my positioning naturally is.
Do you feel like through those experiences in nature and creative expression, do you feel like you're gaining insights around it at this point? Or maybe I should say, what kind of insights are you gaining?
Yeah, I think, for example, nature is just this beautiful space for you to be yourself in connection with the world. So it creates for me this sense of, just space. Spaciousness is such a good word for it. I feel held. I feel like I belong. It creates this natural sense of belonging that allows me to not worry so much about belonging and just focus on what drives me, what I want. It allows me that time to think and feel into myself. Creative expression, if I'm doing it with a degree of self-reflection, that becomes this special place that I can tap into parts of myself that I can't do so much cognitively. I can't think through the same way as I do when I create some artwork or journaling even. The things that come out with just that flow of creative expression allows me to tap into something deeper. And that gives me really great insight, more than the cognitive, who am I? What do I want? It just kind of tells you yep, that image that I just drew, I can feel it as I draw it, that feels bad or good. And it's more clear to me than just that cognitive cycle.
I love that. It makes me think of Ian McGilchrist. He's a neuroscientist, and in his book, The Master and His Emissary, he talks about how the relationship between the right and the left hemisphere is, I'm paraphrasing this, but it talks about it's backwards from the way we typically look at it. We love to go left to right. We love to start cognitive, but he talks about how the left is the emissary of the right, that the right hemisphere is there for being deep and creatively solving problems and connecting with ourselves and each other in ways that are much more potent and powerful. And so I just feel like it's so amazing to hear you describing this, that through creative expression, which is a right brain activity, that is what gives you the insight. And then the left just gives you language to wrap around the experience, to say the thing happened and this is some language to help talk about that, which is a more right relationship between experience.
That's great. Yes. We are very focused on the cognitive aspects of life. And I think that hinders our access to intuition and seeing the right brain as kind of more the puzzle solving side of ourselves. If our culture did approach it that way, I wonder how much potential would be unleashed.
Yeah. That would be so interesting to see. And even just the difference in curiosity that might be present with people. I mean, even what we're talking about, we're talking about something that it's not tangible, it's not visible, it's difficult to define. It's something that really is felt more than, you can see the expression of, but that you can't really make a checklist around it. You can't make a formula around it. It's hard to wrap language around it. And the absence of it causes problems for people, deep, lasting existential crises. For me, when I think about connection to soul, the ways that it happens is very much in these deeper places. So for example, guided meditation or deep imagery work or a nature wander, music, or through finger painting or collage, or all of these very intuitive, creative, imagery oriented expressions. I find that's where the insight comes, or at least where the information is found. And then through the journal, I'm able to kind of organize all the stuff a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is very challenging to think about what the soul is, what his journey is, what it means to feel like you belong. It is very abstract. And those little, I don't know, I see them as like shortcuts. They're like shortcuts into your soul, shortcuts into your intuition. Those to me are some of the most savory experiences, maybe because I miss that access. When I don't feel like I have access to that side of myself, that intuitive self, that knowing self, I miss it so much. And I feel like it's like a little secret passageway to where I can get there more quickly. And that to me, it feels so juicy and exciting. I love the work for that reason.
Yeah. It is. It's so powerful. It is. I love that. It's juicy, right? It's so rich. Yeah. And like for me, like even just starting the process of discovery has really felt that way. It's felt so juicy. I feel like it's just constantly there. Like it's like there was something that was tucked away inside that I touched it and it opened the box and I can't shut it anymore. It's like a very Pandora's box kind of experience. And it has really colored the way that I see everything, myself, other people. I feel like it's enabled me to be more in touch with some of that intuitive function. It's been able to help me be more in touch with the somatic experience, like the body experience. Sometimes maybe I get a little too overexcited about things, but I also find that it's like connecting my waking experience with the deepest part of myself in a way that there's an alignment. And I don't feel like I'm fully there, but I feel like rather than driving with my eyes closed, I've at least got one eye open. And there's a little bit more intentional expression in the way that I interact with people, the way that I try and show up in the world. And there are plenty of times when I'm not there, but I would say more often than not, I find a definitive difference in how I show up. And I'm much more aware of when I'm doing something that's not in alignment.
What you just said about tapping into intuition, changing your relationship with the world, that is a key component of having that access that does feel so juicy. It's not just I can place a label on myself. It's more, wow, I can have healthy interactions and feel like there's life generated between and with others when I'm in that intuitive self. I can make things flow better just by accessing that part of myself and stepping into who I am and aligning myself with that, aligning my actions with that. That allows me to drop all of the questioning of belonging and just be present with others and in my environment. And that really, that taps into that sense of belonging that is what's one of the most fulfilling things there is, I think.
You're making me think about like Brene Brown, like the way she talks about belonging, where she talks about like belonging versus fitting in. And I feel like so often we're so focused on fitting in, and belonging is the opposite of that. Like I'm not trying to change myself to be part of some like social construct. It's like I'm trying to find my tribe. I'm trying to find the people where I'm seen, heard, understood, valued, where we can all be present together, right? Or like the idea of like Linda Cunningham talks about relational fields, and like the first relational field is the oneness. It's like the child in the womb, like, and like the first little bit where like a baby doesn't see themselves as separate, but then you hit like the terrible twos, which is the like the two-ness, which is like no, saying I'm not you, like I'm not mom. And then we spend so much time in the two-ness of like, I'm me, not you. But then when you get to the relational field of the three-ness, which is you're you and I'm me, and we can be together in this beautiful space of like reciprocity, where I can honor the uniqueness in you and you can honor the uniqueness in me, and we can honor the beauty of that experience together. And it's like, that's what we're trying to get to. as opposed to like trying to go from the two-ness back to the oneness. Like fitting in is saying like, I'm going to be subsumed, where belonging is transcending the two-ness into the three-ness and saying like, no, we can do better.
That seems to summarize the soul's journey right there. Ideally, is that getting to that place of, going through my own self, focus on me, and then belong with others, and then coming into the place of that union and holding the separateness at the same time and respecting the differences and still finding connection through that. That does seem to be where the soul feels comfortable and at home.
Yeah, which is difficult. I love the way you even describe it. And I feel like right at the beginning, I feel like you really tapped into like the first part of the process of how do we get there, which is the recognition of individual uniqueness, the individual, like the gifts, the strengths. There's an exercise that I have found to be helpful and also mysterious and difficult in that regard. Like, have you read Jean Houston's book, The Wizard of Us?
No, I haven't. It's on my list.
Okay. Obviously, grad school, and we are reading small library all the time. The reason I read it is because it was for a class. But this is real. Like, what we're talking about here is a big piece of the book. Like, she talks about the Wizard of Oz as the myth of self-discovery. All the characters and the symbols in the book are each of us. And she makes this connection to this Greek idea of entelechy, which is this part of us that is kind of fully developed and aware of all of our unique specialness. So like the good witch Glenda, like she knew what was up. She had all the knowledge. She had all the magic. So we did this sequence of guided meditations where the purpose of it was to have a journey with the personal entelechy, to essentially go meet your own version of the good witch Glenda internally. And that was the starting point. And I think Jean Houston lays out like 3 ways to do this in the book. And I don't remember how many I think we did all 3 in class, but the first 2 were really hard for me. I was like, I don't really get this. Like, this is kind of, I don't know. But the one that made the most difference for me, it felt more like a deep imagery journey than it did a guided meditation. Like, I think I had like read through what I was supposed to do or listen to, and I was like, I'm just going to do it on my own. So in this deep imagery journey, I'm like face to face with the expression of entelechy for me, which was like glowy and light, and I don't remember all the details of it, but I remember in the journey asking like show me my individual gifts that are the most important. And like, I've done a lot of deep imagery work with the idea of the personal totem pole, and I feel pretty connected to those images. And in this deep imagery journey, this entelechy figure like reached into my chest and like pulled my heart out, and then all of my like personal totem guides like left my body, went around this entelechy figure, and then the entelechy figure like planted my heart in the ground, and it became a seed that like this huge oak tree grew out of. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on here. Like, this is some kind of like mystical weirdness. And I like journal about it. And I'm like, I legitimately have no clue what just happened. So then I spent a little while working with it, and I was like, what is the significance here? Like, what's up with the tree? What's up with the heart? What's up with these different, like, all like, what's up with the animals? Like, and that was really potent, because the imagery on its own was like, I've got nothing. But as I worked with it, I started to find a lot of things. And that really kind of led me down the track of identifying that individual uniqueness and saying like, what are some of the gifts that I bring? And so that was a really powerful way for me to start. And so it's an example of like, how do I find it? Well, you can do some meditation and say like, let me meditate with the good witch Glenda.
I love the idea of tapping into that aspect of self, because we are so often cut off from that and think, we have all these gatekeeping voices in our head of what we can't do, that we think that Glenda is not part of us. We think that it's something we must get to in the future, and we won't belong. We won't have purpose or meaning until we become her. But I love that exercise because it reminds us she's already here. She's already within me. How can I tap into what she has to say? Just be in her presence now.
What would you recommend to deal with the gatekeepers around it? Because I completely agree.
I'm thinking of an exercise that basically is just you going through, I am worthy of love. I am worthy of pursuing what excites me. I can serve the world in a meaningful way. Just literally going through and taking all of those gatekeeping voices and saying the opposite and giving yourself a new narrative, basically.
I'm curious, like, how have you seen that benefit you in working with those internal gatekeeping voices?
Yeah, I think it can be helpful as long as I'm also allowing the gatekeeper to really say what the gatekeeper has to say first. I think if I try to give those narratives, it's like, gatekeeper, you have no value in telling me that I don't deserve to follow my passion, for example. If I just shut that gatekeeper away and say, no, I deserve it, it doesn't resolve that conflict. But if I really sit and take time with the gatekeeper and kind of question, like, what makes you feel you don't belong or don't deserve this or whatever it might be, the gatekeeper is allowed to speak and then doesn't feel like it has to yell as much. It doesn't become such a block to action.
So I would be identifying the gatekeeping voice, giving it a chance to speak its piece, and then also updating it with a more accurate representation of where I'm at now. Am I tracking that right?
Yes.
Okay. I love that. Like, it just feels like there's a lot of magic in that.
There is magic in letting all the parts of yourself really be heard and holding those different narratives in the same space and allowing them to exist together. It like creates this feeling of freedom. I don't have to identify with the gatekeeper, or I don't have to shun the gatekeeper to identify with Glenda the Good Witch. I can hold them both in the same space and realize that and all the other voices, they're all a part of me. And it allows me to flow between them more easily by doing so.
Yeah. Like acknowledging that there's wisdom and value in the gatekeeper as much as in like what we really want to hear. It feels like it opens something up, a latent capacity for touching the deepest place. I have to acknowledge that there's value everywhere in the system.
Yeah, because the gatekeeper is there for a reason as well. The gatekeeper is there to protect us and make sure we're going into the world in a way that doesn't take on too much risk. And I think that's valuable. So I try to remember that when looking into my gatekeeper, that I'll even ask the question, what's the deeper thing that I'm worried about? What risk do I see here? How can I acknowledge that risk? Just investigating into why did the gatekeeper decide that this is so important? All that investigation really creates space and movement when the gatekeeper feels like it has to hold on so strong and put up a wall. So it kind of like takes the bricks of the wall apart and lays them down. And it's like the bricks are still there for me to have that solid understanding of what risk is, but there's no longer the wall.
It's a beautiful image. This is like maybe a little bit of an irreverent image that comes to mind in relation to it, but it also reminds me of Monty Python and the Holy Grail when they're going to find the sorcerer Tim to help them like slay the deadly rabbit, and they have to cross the bridge. There's the old guy, like the blind old man or whatever at the bridge. Like he's the gatekeeper. It's like you've got to he's the one that makes sure you're ready.
That's right.
You have to know your favorite color, and you have to know the capital of Assyria or whatever random things. But I think there's also some real cool wisdom in that too. Like he starts the same with every person. What's your name and what's your quest? And I feel like that's the real task of the gatekeeper is like, do you really, like, are you ready? Like, are you in a good place? Mm-hmm. Can I step back and allow you to pass? Are you in a place where it's safe to be able to make that next step? to cross the bridge and go find the sorcerer or sorceress.
Yeah, that is great. I just love what you said right there. Yeah, and when you think of the gatekeeper in that way, it becomes your ally rather than, this contender that's like preventing you from getting where you want to go. Which I think when you can look at those parts of yourself in that loving way, in that way of seeing them as an ally, really, I mean, that creates that sense of belonging in oneself, is really looking into those shadows of yourself and finding the value there.
It's like the quest for soul is like the personal grail quest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'd thought about it before. Like there's this quest for the grail that isn't about the object. It's about the journey, and it's about the development of self that gives you the capacity to be gifted this powerful thing, the powerful symbol. And that, I think that for me personally, like that feels very accurate to what the journey has been like a little bit. And there's been like a little bit at a time, but I mean, one of the other exercises that I've done around this feels a bit like coming to the bridge and not being quite ready, being ready for some, but not all. There's this idea that Bill Plotkin talks about in his book, Wild Mind. The descent to soul requires some prep work. You can't just jump in there and expect to be ready. But one of the things he talks about is you have this facet of the self that is associated with the soul. And in his model, he uses cardinal directions to kind of outline it. The West is the facet of self that's associated with the soul. And so we did this deep imagery journey where you had an animal of the West and we journey with it. And I have this experience with the animal of the West. And like, there are all these questions we're supposed to be asking it. Can I ask you some more questions about this? And the answer to the first question was no. And everything else is based on a yes. So I'm like, okay, we're just going to hang out. There was some real potent imagery there and some really beautiful things that came. But the primary response I got around a quest for information was no. Like, you aren't ready, which was hard. Like, I didn't even know what to do with that, but it really felt like there's that piece inside that knows, like, you haven't done the work yet. You're not ready for this. And then I want to say it took me probably 6 months of work before I felt a little bit of a tug to say, like, you're ready to do a little bit more with this. But yeah, you got to work with those gatekeepers and you got to respect that wisdom that's there.
Yeah, so great to think about the requirement of patience that exists on this journey, that you were able to just sit with the no, like, I'm not ready for the next step, and to sit with that and allow yourself to be in that. And we have this cultural or maybe just internally driven sense that we must always be advancing toward that goal, that destination, that sense of home. And we always are, but sometimes that journey includes pausing. It includes stopping and resting and reflecting. And that can be some of the most painful part of the experience if you don't have the patience for it, or if you're trying to like force it.
Yeah, it can be really hard to sitting with the not knowing, to almost feel like you're at the cusp of something really potent. That's a hard place to sit.
What do you do when you come to those places of, okay, it's probably best for me to pause here and not push so much? What helps you with that challenge?
For me, I find that I'm typically just asking the wrong question, right? I'm like, if I hit the need to pause, like there's some kind of prerequisite that's not met yet. And so I need to ask a different question. I feel like typically we look at a no as pretty definitive, but I find, for me at least, the no is more of a redirection. It's more of like you're about to fall down the stairs. Stop. This isn't right yet. You need to go over here and you need to work on your balance a little bit. And I find that if I'm willing to do that, if I'm willing to take a step back and then start asking different questions, then I can gain some insight on what's the prerequisite I haven't satisfied yet. And I find that can come up in a variety of ways, right? Like I could do I could pull cards and do like a 10 card spread, or I could Like I could do a deep imagery journey, or I can just journal, or I can do some art, and, you know, something that's more in that depth oriented place. I could go to a nature wander, but if I ask a different question, I find that I typically get like, this is the missing piece, or this is the first of the many missing pieces that you need to work on.
Yeah, that feels, I like what you said there. That it's just maybe a matter of asking another question or engaging in another part of the training or a side road of the quest, rather than, it's not that you stop altogether from the journey or the growth process. It's just kind of not on that main path.
Yeah. And it's definitely, it's like a gradual thing. You know, I think it wasn't too long after I had that initial kind of what I would classify as like a soul encounter that I did another deep imagery and had another one that gave me a little bit more. It was more of like a, here's an idea you need to understand. And I think the main idea I got out of that was like, I need to understand, or at least think about, the psychological idea of alchemy. And it's something I hadn't really considered before. And it took me down this rabbit hole, and I was working on it and working on it. And there really wasn't a lot else that was coming up around those like soul encounter experiences for a while, until then it was like, oh, I kind of feel like I want to do a nature wander with my journal. So I did that. And then at each stage, I feel like there's a question that comes up and a mechanism to explore the question that usually that gives me homework for a couple months. And I often find that the hang up is some wounding that I haven't seen, acknowledged, or dealt with, like healed or worked on healing. That's typically what's in the way.
That feels true to me in my experience. Just the shadow material coming to surface that has not been addressed. Yeah. And that oftentimes it does take those side journeys of self-reflection and integration to get back on that main path.
Yeah, it's like we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. You just got a side quest.
Yeah. I love it.
That might be a little too nerdy. I don't know.
That's great. The main thing that's coming up for me right now, we did talk about belonging in relation to others. A part of me that always processes everything alone and doesn't want to ask others for help. It's like speaking up right now and saying, don't forget, you can find your sense of belonging in relation with others. Reach out to others, try to connect, try to find groups that are interested in what you're interested in. There's a sense of balance with belonging, where you find it within yourself and it stems from within, but your ability to position yourself and know your position also has to do with being in relation to others, which is, we talked about that. You mentioned the idea of like ecological self.
Yeah. I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind, right? Like if self, like if soul is focused not just on what's inside of me, but what's inside of me in relation to the world around me, then I've got to actually connect with the world around me as part of my process.
Yeah, it seems like you wouldn't need to say that, but sometimes that reminder is helpful.
Definitely. When I can think of tangible, like recent experiences where that's happened, there's something about the relational experience that is critical to the experience of connecting with and embodying and expressing soul in the world. Well, this has been amazing, and I feel like I've learned so much from the experience, from being with you. I feel so much gratitude for the time together. I'm so excited for the journey forward.
Yeah, just feeling into your word gratitude. And I just want to leave my gratitude on the table as well. I feel very grateful to be here. And, you know, I had this question of, do I belong on this podcast? Is this part of my journey? Is it really? And so, yeah, I'm just excited to be here, exploring my own soul's journey with you. So thanks for the invitation.
Well, and to everyone who is tuning in, thank you so much again for being here with us. We would love it for you to connect with us, to reach out to us. We'd love to hear your own experiences as well as your questions. So feel free to connect with us on social media, on Instagram or Facebook, or through email. And as always, keep delving deep and embracing the journey.